and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection. Everyone has the right to form and to join trade unions for the protection of their interests.
Everyone has the right to rest and leisure, including reasonable limitation of working hours and periodic holidays with pay.
Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care and necessary social services, and to the right of security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. Motherhood and childhood are entitled to special care and assistance. All children, whether born in or out of wedlock, shall enjoy the same social protection.
Everyone has the right to education. Education shall be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory. Technical and professional education shall be made generally available, and higher education shall be equally accessible to all on the basis of merit. Education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It shall promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial or religious groups, and shall further the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace. Parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that should be given to their children.
Everyone has the right to freely participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts, and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. Everyone has the right to the protection of the moral and material interests resulting from any scientific, literary, or artistic production of which he is the author.
Everyone is entitled to a social and international order in which the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration can be fully realized.
Everyone has duties to the community in which alone the free and full development of his personality is possible. In the exercise of his rights and freedoms, everyone shall be subject only to such limitations as are determined by law, solely for the purpose of securing due recognition and respect for the rights and freedoms of others, and of meeting the just requirements of morality, public order, and the general welfare in a democratic society. These rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations.
Nothing in this declaration may be interpreted as implying for any state, group, or any person any right to engage in any activity or to perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and freedoms set forth herein.
Wow, that's it's very powerful language, and you can see that even though this is many decades old at this point, it's still very alive. Of course, we have changed the pronouns a bit since the writing of this, but of course, Eleanor understood the generic male pronoun to be universal, applying to every gender. I know, and of course, she, being a woman, she didn't mean that a he was only a man. But nonetheless, I occasionally do tweak it when I quote it myself, but that was really amazing. I think we should give a huge applause, virtual applause, to everybody who participated in the creation of this video. I've heard this declaration, I don't know, hundreds of times read out loud, and every time I find it moving. So, and I hope you do too, and inspiring. But what we're going to do now for, 12, 15 minutes, is that what we got? We're going to talk about the relationship of any of these rights and all of these rights, but we don't have time to talk about all 30 of them, to health. And I want to start actually by just noting that the very last one, which seems like this little coda, Article 30, is something that we are challenged with today in the enormous fraught debate around mandates, vaccines, mask mandates, et cetera, because there is a discussion going on in the human rights community about whether those voices that are spreading mis or disinformation about vaccines are actually and or refusing to be vaccinated when they can safely be vaccinated, for those who can, which is most people, that they are actually infringing on the rights of others. And so Article 30 and 29 as well, in terms of responsibilities to the community, is being discussed more than ever in my memory. So just noting that. But let's have now, I don't know if people actually unmute and speak? No, we
I
can't.
think
Okay,
some,
so
yeah, I
so we'll
think
do this
some
in the
individuals
chat.
can, but
We'll do this in the chat then. I'm going to call out a couple of a right or two, and I want you in the chat to say or put a little phrase of, what is the connection of that right to health? And those of you who can speak, who have the open mics, so maybe this is mostly the organizing group, you can actually speak and share with us, because maybe that you'll be the proxies for everybody else with your voices, if that's okay for this next bunch of minutes. And I've done this session with medical students for many years, and it's always illuminating to me and to, I think, the students. So I hope you'll find this engaging. So we're going to talk about how is a particular right relevant to health. And let's start with some of the hard ones. So what is the connection of the right to a fair trial to health? And especially those of you on the organizing committee and the SAB, if you can unmute and speak out, because let's have this be a little conversation here.
I'll take a whack at it, actually. I would say it's important for people to have representation because it's kind of weird to say as a medical person, but
It's
the medical
okay.
system, it does in a lot of countries, having some representation to be able to defend yourself is an important thing. Also to get justification for things that you might be entitled to in healthcare if certain groups are restricted from getting equal healthcare and stuff like that. So in terms of representation in the legal system, I think it's important.
That's a good one. There's also the situation where, around the world, and we saw some of those people in the video, like our wonderful colleague, Dr. Fincanci Shebnem from Turkey. These doctors themselves were arrested and accused of supporting terrorism by speaking out for the Kurds in the southeast of Turkey, and for writing about the human rights violations. And repeatedly, they did not have fair trials. So sometimes this issue of fair trial actually affects doctors themselves. But another thing we might think about is that for people who have been denied a fair trial, whether a jury is rigged or a judge is biased, and there are many discussions going on in the wake of yesterday's verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse case, even, although I'm not going to opine on it myself or for PHR, there are allegations that there were various aspects of the trial that were not adequate or fair, but populations can feel threatened, and that affects not only the physical health, perhaps, of populations who don't feel that trials are fair, but also their mental health. Okay, let's move to another one. What about the connection with freedom of assembly and association to health?
I think we as doctors and physicians for human rights work, we're seeing a lot of collective action on behalf of physicians to represent their patients and themselves as workers, and the ability to safely organize in that way is critical, I think, and for doctors to have that voice.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts about that? The general freedom of assembly, how does that affect the health of your patients if people were not able to mobilize or organize or demonstrate or speak out? And feel free to speak on the chat if you can't unmute.
So we have a response from the chat. Irvin states, ability for healthcare personnel to protest, for example, when healthcare providers weren't provided enough PPE at the beginning of the pandemic.
Absolutely, that was huge. And as you may know, Physicians for Human Rights really mobilized around that, advocating and also assuring that healthcare workers who were threatened in such ways had whistleblower protections as well within their hospitals. And we actually got many, many calls from doctors and nurses who were threatened on their wards by higher ups in their hospitals, unfortunately, for speaking out and saying, we're afraid, we don't have PPE, and we don't know what to do about it. And so we advocated on their behalf as well. Okay, let's talk about the connection between the right to education and health.
So actually, I think we have another response about your previous discussion. So we have from Carly, she stated physical health consequences of prohibited assembly are equivalent to torture, gassing, and incarceration.
Okay, yeah, no, that's really true. And a lot of the ways in which the freedom of assembly is suppressed is by violence. And we've seen that just in the last few weeks in Sudan, but we also saw that in Mott Haven in the Bronx, where PHR put out a study, if you go on our website, about what happened there when protesters in the Bronx were, arrested and tear gassed and jammed into narrow spaces, threatening also their health because of the pandemic. So let's move on to education. The right to education and health. What's the connection, folks? Is there one?
I'll take another stab at this one. Patients have a right to be educated on that one sense. And then again, as healthcare workers, we have to be able to educate ourselves and safely do that. We depend on science and rigor in all of the work that we do. And that's really critical to be able to translate that to patients and speak clearly on those things.
Okay, what about, let's say, the most basic level of education, which is literacy for most people?
Yes.
What
we actually have a comment on that.
Yes. Okay, go for it. Please read it.
So
thank you.
Anahita, I believe I'm saying your name correctly. If I'm not, I apologize. But she states patients with greater health literacy have better health outcomes. And then we also have a response from Carly, who states vulnerable patients may not have equal access based on health conditions, for example, disabilities, menstruating, language.
Absolutely, yeah. The by far the single greatest correlation to health and lack of health in study after study after study is education. So education correlates to health more strongly than any other factor in determining whether a person's health will be good. And so I used to say that for PHR, we should just stop everything we're doing and work on the right to education and access to equal and high quality education, because that is the single greatest guarantee that you can influence health, because you don't actually have a full right to be healthy, because there's so many factors that are beyond an individual's control, as you know, that determine whether you actually have a right to be healthy. On the other hand, of course, Article 25, which guarantees the right to a range of economic needs and supports and social benefits, which include housing, shelter, food, and access to health care, is where we derive the right to health. So our study Article 25, it's been elaborated a lot in the decades since the Declaration, in covenants and international treaties, and it's something that Physicians for Human Rights is advocating for now, probably more than we have in recent years explicitly, and I know that this conference will be talking about that a lot. Let's talk about, yes, go ahead.
So sorry, and I didn't want to miss the two comments that we had in the chat regarding education and health as well. So Sandra stated also communication in primary language to better understand health. And then Allison stated countless studies state that child health is intrinsically linked to education level of their mothers.
Absolutely. And I'll just jump in because we don't have time to do too many more questions, but I'm gonna do one or two more. Is that somebody mentioned, I think, children and family, and we have this right, the right to marry and found a family, but we also have the issue of consent. And one of the big challenges for maternal and child health in the world is forced marriage, as well as underage marriage, and where in far too many countries in the world, girls can be married at very young ages. And so we have, the human rights community has advocated for a minimum age of marriage, and of course, making sure that there is consent, true consent, which is very difficult. Okay, let's try the right to rest and leisure and the connection to health. Let's think about your own rest and leisure, folks, as medical students and how it affects your health. I would love to hear one or two people talk about that.
So I can speak a little bit about that maybe. So right to rest and leisure can really alleviate a lot of mental health, I think, like opportunities to reflect and do meditative practices or engage in mental health. I think that's one aspect. And then also, if you're doing a physically demanding job, the ability to rest also gives your body a chance to heal and recuperate.
Yeah, so how many of you in this conference room right now have felt that your right to rest and leisure has been curtailed as medical students? And how many of you have actually felt the literal physical effects of being tired? Yes, nodding. I see some people nodding. So, I mean, just imagine if you had a job, which is the case in far too many places in the world and was the case and sometimes still is in the United States, where you absolutely have no days off. What does that do to your health? And what's impacted beyond your actual own physical health? Think about families, homes.
I think when that thought was initially brought up, my mind went directly to the idea of maternity and paternity leave and how the United States does not require it.
Very good. Yeah. And so essential, not only for the health of the mother or father, let's say, or the parent, but also for the child when there's lack of care because people are forced to work and have no leisure. So some of these basic worker rights, which connect to the forming unions, the right to form a union is in here. So let's finish with the right to vote, because everybody's talking about that in the United States right now. How does that connect to health? And we will end with that one. Anybody? Any thoughts?
I think the obvious one that comes to mind is being able to vote for healthcare policies that will benefit your health.
That's a big one. What does it do to you if you feel like your right to vote is suppressed, that you don't have it for whatever reason? So it goes back to this. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it ties into our previous conversation regarding mental health. And I think the right to vote also ties into all of the other rights, because if you can't vote for the rights that you can have, then you can't really take care of your health.
Absolutely. And just going back to one of the most important concepts for all of us in the idea of human rights is this really important word, dignity. All of these rights together, including the right to health, allow people to live with dignity. And I'll just go back to the definition of health by the World Health Organization is a complete state of physical, mental, and social well-being. And we often forget the social part. When the full realization of all these rights are guaranteed, then a person can really live to their most complete potential. And that enables people to live a life with dignity. And as doctors, future doctors, dignity is, I hope, going to be imbued in every aspect of your interactions, not only with patients, but your understanding of the communities from which your patients come and in which they live. And that goes back to this concept of home and what is home. I know we're going to have many sessions that are going to talk about what happens when these rights are infringed. And I want to finish this session with saying that what Eleanor Roosevelt said at the end of that speech on the 10th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was, it is in our hands. She believed that the only way, after 10 years of this declaration and realizing how the governments at the United Nations were just going to argue and promote their own self-interests and not really deeply commit to these rights, that it was citizens and especially non-governmental organizations like Physicians for Human Rights, like Human Rights Watch, like Amnesty International, like all the solidarity groups in country after country and in your locations and in your communities at home that are going to be needed to demand the rights. And that's why she said, this declaration is in your hands. It's in my hands. It's in our hands. And that's the importance of this speech. We're coming up to December 10th, which is International Human Rights Day. It is the day on which everybody in the world who is connected to human rights and the human rights movement celebrates this declaration. I hope you'll all figure out some way to mark the declaration, or maybe show that video again at your own medical schools, or in the morning when you all get up, and before you go into your classes, or whatever way you can, so that we're reminded on December 10th and every day how we need to grab onto these rights, and we need to work hard to promote them for yourselves, for your community, for your profession, and ultimately for the world. So thanks for your participation, and onward to your next session.
Thank you so much, Susannah, for starting off the conference and leading this wonderful discussion surrounding human rights. And for those of you who
Thank you, Abby.
Thank you. For those of you who may be interested, we also have a video over the Declaration of Human Rights linked in the stage below. So if you want to check it out, you can. And thank you all for your participation. We have a little bit of time for a break, so we have 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll get started with our speaker, who Jessica will introduce in the future. Thank you all.